Good afternoon, most people. Good evening to some of you as well in Europe and in Asia. But good afternoon if you're in the United States. My name is Phil Fersht. I'm the CEO, Chief Analyst at HFS Research. We're looking forward to a really informative hour with some real stalwarts of the services industry over the last couple of decades. And we're going to talk about the shift towards managed services. We've been hearing a lot more about, some of the big consulting firms evolving into these managed service models. The world is shifting. The way people are buying services is changing, and the world of outsourcing is going through a big shift right now, where the labor arbitrage model of the last quarter of a century is going to be flat. Could even shrink next year. It's a first time ever. It's really slowed down in the current climate. Maybe the current commoditization of service delivery, and we're starting to see a mind shift towards quite market growth in managed services. So I'm going to have my esteemed colleagues introduce themselves as well, who are joining me for today's conversation. Elena, could you kick this off?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Elena Christopher. I'm the Chief Research Officer at HFS, and I also specialize in industry research, with my area of expertise being banking and financial services. Really looking forward to the conversation today.
Terrific. And Dave Brown, good to have you back on here. How are you doing, Dave?
Doing fine, Phil. I always enjoy these sessions, as you know. Just by way of introduction, currently running managed services globally for KPMG, but I've been in this space for outsourcing and shared services for several decades. So very excited to see the transformation of this industry and looking forward to having conversations today.
Terrific. And another gentleman who I don't think has been on an HFS event platform in a very long time, but great to have him back, is Ron Walker. How you doing, Ron?
I'm doing well, Phil, and thanks. Yeah, it's actually been a while since I've been on at least this side of the aspect. As you know, you and I go way back. But I'm following in Dave's footsteps, and so I'm now taking leadership of the managed services team in the US, and have just come in from leading the finance transformation practice from the US. And there are a lot of overlapping topics that I think we're going to get into today. So looking forward to that conversation.
These are the issues that we're going to discuss, the shift we just mentioned towards the managed service model. We're going to get into some talk around pricing structures, reskilling and retooling, particularly with this emerging tech and services, and the role of Gen AI. Obviously, we have to dig deep into an area where you probably saw we put out a ton of research on Gen AI, well, all year long, but especially this week with a major evaluation of the industry and service provider markets, the importance of governance and how to manage diverse technologies, services, and outcomes, and then this link between managed services and consulting to drive ongoing value and a really evolved operating model. So let's sort of think a bit about what we're talking about just now around this shift towards more value. And so this is a question we put out to our 600 and Global 2000 enterprises every 6 months. And we've asked them very much around, what represents their current business model and what do they think it's going to look like in a couple of years. And you can see here in the bright purplish colored bars, most people today are still focused more on cost savings and efficiency with their business services model. That's 47%. In terms of are they focusing on driving outcomes and more end-to-end process scope, that's around a third, which pretty much fits with our observations. You've got a third are kind of ahead of the pack, and then nearly 20% are actually focused on data-driven insights and emerging tech to really drive the model in terms of looking for new sources of value. So this shift, which is quite marked from that model to the next model. And just to pronounce this better, we often look at stage one of services as effort, where you've seen Horizon 1. Most companies tend to be still paying for time and materials, still priced by FTE. They want things priced by FTE. A lot of companies. Stage 2 is performance, where we saw a third of companies, which is about paying for outcomes more, looking at the quality of data. And then stage 3 is you start to get to more joint purpose, that sort of thing. So how does this translate to managed services? Maybe Dave, do you want to kick off with how you're seeing the industry, and does this surprise you at all where we see clients today?
Doesn't surprise me, but I do have to reflect though on the first slide though, where Phil, we've been doing State of the Union for probably over 10 years, and costs were always number one. And just even when we would look 2 or 3 years out, cost was still as number one, to the point where we discounted it. I think off of our results, we would say, okay, everybody knows cost is a focus. Let's look at the next 3. This is intriguing to me, in that we're finally starting to see organizations take a look at the value that they're going to be able to get out of their ecosystems or their service providers going forward, more than just the cost. And for me, when we've looked at it over the last 4 or 5 years, that's the sentiment we're seeing from our clients. They're asking about, that's awesome that you can take some cost out, but this transformation journey that we're on is continuous. And so how are you guys helping us on an ongoing basis to bring additional value? How are you looking at the data to be able to bring those insights that may not be applicable right to the scope you're providing, but maybe into some other areas around market development and sales? And then the last part is around the emerging tech. Tech is changing too fast. You can't look at it just as a cost play. It has to be something that you're investing in ongoing. So we're getting asked that question. Are you actually helping us become more of a value creation versus that cost driving? So that's why I wanted to go back to this slide, because I think it's so critical to see the sentiment of our clients actually starting to move in that direction.
Interesting. And
I just wanted to add a quick comment to that, because Dave, I agree with you. I think that this is such an interesting perspective, but just to make sure we remain grounded in reality. And you essentially alluded to this, Dave, which is cost isn't going away, but it's become a cost, and that's a really critical way that you need to interpret this slide. Cost but the and is right to the right side of the screen, the emerging piece, which is what are those new sources of value? And your technology example is a really, really ripe one.
Yeah. And then you can see here, we're going to flip to the study where we spoke with 1,000 executives around their operations here. We can see this market growing to maybe $1/3 billion by 2025. So, markets are flat in the traditional outsourcing markets, but this is where we're seeing funds being diverted, the need to access specific talent really evolving, and companies, as they've stated, are looking at driving strategic priorities, accessing new tech. So thinking about these lines, 70% have implemented, for example, some scope in cybersecurity and sales and marketing, and these are the areas of highest uptake in terms of looking at managed services. But 60% of firms use services really to scale in a business function for R&D and industry-specific core operations. Maybe Ron, can you share some of your more recent experiences with us on where you're seeing more demand from the enterprise, and where you're making your investments at KPMG?
Well, I think it kind of comes in 2 sides. We still see a significant uptick. I shouldn't say still. We're seeing a significant uptick in just the functional capabilities, what you've got there. So finance and HR and procurement. So and those models are becoming more interrelated, but we're seeing pretty significant uptick in a managed service approach in like life sciences and healthcare, where you need to understand, what does the revenue model look like in a healthcare hospital, and how do I go about, partnering with our clients to optimize that? Or in life sciences, this has been going on for years, but it's becoming more interrelated. And when you're looking at clinical data studies and clinical data programs and how they're pulling that together and using the data, not just inside from the studies that the clients are pulling together now and performing, but also outside. So we're seeing uptick in, as you've noted here, in specific industry functional areas, specific industry areas as well as functional. And so our firm, we're still trying to cover the horizontal, but we're trying to pick where we most match with our customers and clients in the industry areas.
Okay, that's interesting. So this brings going on to the next big topic related to this is no matter how sophisticated we set up managed services in terms of outcomes, in terms of skill sets, if enterprises only want to pay in a per headcount model, can we ever move the market? And so here's our view of the Global 2000. This was 600 of the leading enterprises here running these outsourcing engagements. And you can see on the left, 83% are looking to renegotiate their current outsourcing contracts. And on the right, most telling to me is that 47% still want to pay on staff numbers. So they want to pay on the cost, time, and materials and the stayed effort-based model. But 53% actually want to invest more in a data business outcomes model in terms of how that's provided. So maybe, Dave, why is it that if clients are saying they want to shift to outcomes, they want to shift to a value-based model, why are the majority still stuck in the effort-based phase?
I'll start with one word, trust. I don't think that clients trust yet the model going forward, that the ability to pay per widget or pay for outcome is fully understood, and that the service providers actually have a costing model that correlates exactly to the work effort that it takes to produce that. We know Gen AI is going to have a huge impact on that work effort. And I know a lot of providers, including KPMG, were looking at, so how do you actually take advantage of that without giving away all of the actual gains that you are making for future investments? But at the same time, how do you make sure that you're actually cost competitive in the marketplace? So there's this, I say trust issue that's going on. There's probably lack of understanding of how this is going to actually play out. And me as a client, am I getting the most value out of that? Do I get the best price if I move to a outcome based versus I know how many heads you have doing the work? I can actually measure that. There's still some of that old school thinking. So I think until we get that and we start actually being a little bit more transparent with how the outcomes and the work efforts that includes a technology element to drive that efficiency, I think it's going to take us a while to actually get this maturity of truly pricing on outcomes.
And can I add to that, Phil? So I agree, Dave, but I'll also say that because this is an unknown area, and we are typically working with more sophisticated organizations a lot of times, and they've got sourcing organizations with which are measured and are trained not to trust or trained to show me kind of the money, if you will. So it's hard for them to kind of move to a new model as well. So there's not an incentive for their organizations, which in many cases, have a significant input as to how these are structured in the legal contracting part.
Well, and maybe I'll add one more piece to it because I love this conversation, Ron. And I know we've talked about it a lot. Procurement does take a look at contracting a little bit differently maybe than the business needs, but at the end of the day, they're all looking for value out of this. And with the unknown of the efficiencies that Gen AI is going to drive out, there's a lot of concern around what the current contract structures are in place today. And will they be able to actually reap the benefits of the proposed efficiency gain? So that's why I think you see that uptick right now in this huge, hey, we want to renegotiate. They want to, especially from procurement, because they're seeing that there's going to be this uptick. I just don't know if they really understand the complications of putting in outcome-based pricing now and how that's going to be able to drive the gain share. So there's a little bit of back and forth there, Phil. I think you guys have actually started to talk on it in some other forums.
Yeah, no, I had a question come in from Mr. Coulter. Cliff and I presented on Outsourcing is Dead 10 years ago. Why is the movement to outcomes so slow? I guess we've answered some of this, but I guess, we have been talking about this for a long time. Then we obviously had a pandemic, which seemed to put a big rewind on everything. Now we come out of pandemic and things, I personally feel, are moving pretty slowly. People are very tentative, but I mean, Ron, why do you think things are moving so slowly in terms of dynamism? Do you think Gen AI and things is going to accelerate this movement?
I've been in outsourcing for 30 years, and I've always thought every next year it's going to be the next big thing and it's going to grow. It's just hard and it's uncomfortable and moving to new models. And because we also span the functions and the responsibilities in large organizations, CEO, CFO, VPF, I mean, everybody's got their responsibilities. So this isn't one of those things to where you'd expect it to change. If so, we'd expect politics to change. We'd expect education to change quickly, right? This is like that. It's a big kind of bureaucratic process that we've been pushing against. We've made tremendous progress, but it's not fast. When we look to Gen AI, I mean, when we look at this FTE model, I've been scratching my head do we go to a virtual FTE? And that's how we price it in the interim until we can get to true outcome based. But it's a matter of what the organizations are comfortable with. And then I am going to be a little bombastic here. Some of us and executives are lazy and we just kind of go with what the model is so we get it done. And that's it. I mean, I'd say that's maybe 40-50% of the issue is simply we just kind of go with what's easy.
Yeah, it's a good answer. I think you're
right. I'll weigh in. I got to weigh in too. I'm raising my hand here. Agree with all of that, Ron, but I will say, and Phil, this, it's like for years, we've been asking sort of off the back of the question, what are the biggest barriers to change? What are the biggest barriers that you face? And unwillingness to change, inflexibility in changing the status quo raises to the top. It's like one of the powers of a survey is it's completely anonymous. So you can actually say what you might be thinking, which is many of these, I like to say any enterprise that's more than 10 years old is not generally highly incentivized to change how they do things. And then you get a lot of the top-down push, and that's sort of maybe similar to your so-called bombastic statement there, Ron. But I also want to bring up one other facet, though, is because when you look at a lot of these deals, they do start to be different. There is no one size fits all. So while this data very clearly shows, there's a tendency towards some of the renegotiation, but there's the want to try some of these outcome-based models. We do increasingly see that a lot of, as these deals are being renegotiated and reorchestrated, that you see lots of different business models coming in. So I do encourage folks because nothing's going to happen if you don't try. And so find something that is inherently measurable that you can actually build at least transaction-based pricing around. That's always the gateway to outcome-based pricing. So you can start to experience how this might work. Because if you don't change any of it and you keep relying on the problem with the FTE-based model is that you look at the reduction you can make, and you alluded to this in a prior answer, Dave, you're not giving adequate room for all of the innovation that could take place. We should see our headcount numbers at least plateauing, and we're not seeing that. So you have to make some room for at least trying it, bringing it in. And that's what we see in so many deals. It starts to become a mixture of what the different approaches are. And back to Dave's point about trust, when you have that trust-based relationship, you can start to go down a path to try some of these different models. But as per the overarching question, I think we've well established there will not be a big bang.
Shift on a little bit to the way that operations are governed. And with managed services, we look at aspects of people, process, technology, but also data and change. Things are moving slowly and painfully. There's many different facets to consider. I'm getting some questions coming in about this sort of tension between the business and procurement as well. But in terms of the governance model, and maybe Dave, you want to pipe in to start with here, what is different about managed services from the way things have maybe been run in the past? And even, we spoke a little about GBS back in the day as well, about these frameworks for managing big complex operations. How do you feel managed services is different from a governance capability, and how can smart managed service providers maybe work with companies in a partnership to help them in these five facets?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, and some may sound a little bit familiar as outsourcing was evolving as well. But the first thing we're seeing is a balance between the transactional type activities and skills that are required with the deeper subject matter expertise from a consulting side. And we're seeing that, again, I've been referring about managed services as really more of a continuation of a transformation journey for the operation side. And you cannot just continue to run the business the same way as you contracted it. So you need to see that ongoing consulting or subject matter expertise, looking for trends, looking for innovation. It's not the old continuous improvement, 3 to 5% every year. We're looking at substantial changes that are required in a 3 to 5 year time period. So I think that's the first thing. And from a governance standpoint, if managed services does not have a part of their solution that has that deeper expertise embedded in it, then it's not a true managed services. That to me is somebody set up a bunch of change orders that they're going to do consulting work on the side, right? It's not integrated. The second part is there needs to be a bigger ecosystem. This is what I meant by when you look at the old days when the IT stacks were coming out and now the partnerships started coming, that each layer had a different alliance. I think for managed services to be successful longer term, you're going to see more of these ecosystems developing across firms and alliances being created. Tech is changing too quick. You can't do the acquisitions like you used to and then think that you could continue to invest in all of it. You need partnerships to be able to do that. So I truly think from a governance standpoint, ecosystems are going to be critical because you can't be all things to all people with the amount of investment that's required in the tech side. So those are the two big things that I say. I know Ron's got other opinions on it or complementary opinions, depending on how you view the time of day that he and I are talking.
Dave, you've covered a fair amount. I mean, look, the reality is when you look at how we engage with the clients, I mean, we are a team. We're going together as a team, and cyber is a great example of, I mean, we're in that together to try to prevent and, any kind of intrusions and look at what happens or do the analysis and then the level of information sharing between those organizations was really never meant to be in the old outsourcing world. So kind of moving forward together in mutual agreement, I guess is probably the best way I can say it. It's a gray line though. I mean, some of the old examples of outsourcing and what we were doing and how we were engaging has, met some of the definitions that we're calling managed service now and vice versa. So I think we're just continuing to progress that model.
What about, there's a good comment here around aligned motives. That could be where this lack of trust comes in. So how do we align motives better between maybe the managed service provider and the client? How do you we talk a lot about trust, but how do we actually really build that and develop it over time? Because that to me feels like if we can get the motives aligned, everything else will fall into place.
I can jump in on that one first. One of the things that we're doing with KPMG's managed services is we're in the early stages. So it may not be managed services. There may be that initial transformation type of work strategy around what's the overall objective that you're trying to achieve. and then aligning on those similar goals. So as we're bringing our managed services component in there, that's already aligned before we get in there. It's not a transaction contracting, if you will. We're in tune with what that overall transformation of that firm is driving towards. We've experimented, and I will, I think it's interesting when I hear other providers say, "Oh no, we've got this," but we've been experimenting with different outcomes that are common goals for our clients. So if they're looking to achieve certain revenue growth, or if they're looking to actually, reduce their debt, whether they're looking at increasing margins, whatever it is, that's really those high level goals, we're trying to tie that into our contracting goals, which is very hard to do because as a service provider, it's extremely difficult to say you can influence those. But the more buy-in around those goals, you can see that starting to formulate that trust. I'm committed to their overall revenue growth or their overall target growth that they have, that their entire organization. I'm part of their ecosystem, so I should be tied to that. Just makes it hard to contract to something of that nature as a third party. But that's where I would see it should get to, and what we should really as an industry start focusing on.
And to add to that, I think when we are dealing directly with procurement, again, and I understand and actually agree with this process, there should be some holdback or earn back for certain levels of performance. Where we always run across a difference of opinion and objective, if you will, is as a provider, we want a little bit more. So what if we exceed that? Aren't we and shouldn't we be allowed to gain more on top of that? And that's where companies don't give in. And so we do find, so then why would a provider want to, sign up for something where they can only lose if they can't gain anything on top of that by putting extra effort in or extra risk or adding more technology, et cetera. So we do need to, that is part trust, that's part maturity of our offerings and the technology, frankly, to track it, because Dave mentioned one thing. It is really hard to track some of these objectives and agree upon those objectives that we track, because provider has one version and the customer has another, and many times they don't meet.
Well, let's shift gears, because clearly we need a catalyst to drive excitement, nervousness, fear, and the behaviors we're seeing here. So you saw the S curve we had earlier, which was about effort, performance, and purpose. This is what we think is happening to this S curve with this emergence of new technology that has potentially seismic impact on how we just operate, how we do business, how we take something that consumers are using and bring it into the enterprise. But clearly everything we've done today has been fairly linear. We've done nearshore, we've been obsessed with Lean, Six Sigma, tech org, DevOps, this sort of stuff. And typically we've seen 20, 30, maybe 40% of productivity improvements. With these emerging technologies and some now fairly established tech like RPA and IDP, process mining, we believe when we look at something like generative AI, once it becomes more mature, once customers really figure out how to scale it, how to manage it, how to learn it, there could be productivity savings as much as 70% plus. I mean, some of the areas like customer ops we've spoken about have really shown some staggering results potentially in terms of what can be achieved. And this could generally be an inflection point in changing these conversations. Is this an inflection point, really? I mean, maybe Dave, you want to kick this off again? You've seen several false dawns in the past, right? Are we on another false dawn, or do you think this is generally different?
Phil, when you look at this slide, start summing up our careers, right? Because you look at the evolution of each one of these, and as you said, the start of the S curve, there's a little bit of that hype. There's a slow adoption to it, but then when it happens, how much accelerated growth really does happen. For me, when we really unpack Gen AI, we are clearly at a similar hype to when we saw RPA coming in. But there has been a little bit of hesitancy in my mind, because there are some of those skeptics that saw RPA come in and said, is it really going to take off again? This one's a little bit different though, right? We're getting at more of those knowledge decisions. We're starting to see the applications that are being the ease to deploy a heck of a lot more than was. I think you're going to see, though, some regulatory constraints coming in over the top around this, and responsible AI entering in that may stifle some of that excitement. But if we're looking at real catalysts to change the actual model of managed services or service providers and outsourcing, I think this is it, because it's starting to get into things that weren't necessarily typically even looked at to have enabling tech support or to drive down the efficiency. It was always about process reengineering. So to my mind, this is going to give us some excitement in this space for the next 2 to 3 years. And you're going to see more and more use cases become practical and in use versus just a collection of them. So I'm excited about it. I know at KPMG, we're investing heavily in this, as are a lot of other providers. But what we're really looking at doing, at least in our area, is how quickly can we get this in place and how quickly we can adopt to it. Because it's going to, once you start putting it into practice, you're going to then get the lessons learned. You're going to start figuring out what works, what doesn't. What do you have to put in controls in place to give that trust back to your clients that this is being protected? So to me, from an S curve, I love this one because it's so much shorter time period than the other ones. I'm not delusional. It's time will tell, obviously, how quickly that S curve will play out. But I do think that you're going to have an accelerated growth on the Gen AI path, more unlike you had in RPA.
And is this partially because C-suite is much more involved in this? It's more like, when ChatGPT came out last November, it's just like, oh, wow, this is like low code for non-IT people. Okay,
well, they made it easy, right? It's made it easier that, heck, I laugh about it, but we were talking with my daughters who are in college, and we were talking about them writing essays. And I said, "Hey, have you seen this thing, ChatGPT? Can you actually use it in your?" She goes, "Oh, Dad, that's so old already." It's actually, when you think about the next generation coming out, it's almost, and it is a terrible analogy, but you think about when Microsoft's pulled out their suite, with Excel, PowerPoint, and Word, people were experts in each of those. That's like just standard toolkits that are now. Gen AI coming forward, they've made it so easy. This next generation is just going to be part of the toolkit. So you do have executives that are actually seeing this as a much more viable tool to practically get in place quicker. And things like chat has made it more visible to them to actually pursue it as well.
I mean, Phil, realistically, the technology is much cheaper, much easier to implement. It's a lay technology, as you said. Even the C-suite can actually use it to their advantage, and we're seeing much more immediate impacts in the organization. Just like we had with RPA and some others, like we're going to have to scale that, and we're going to have to capture those savings hours and put that towards productivity, not just additional workloads and additional things that we're doing that to add more volume to people's days. But we've already seen an adoption much faster, much quicker, and much more impactful than we ever saw with RPA. So your curve is correct, but I'm still a skeptic too, like how fast it will take place. I mean, and we've heard our own Cliff Justice talk about there are limitations in the technology and how fast are the chips going to be made and where the processing capabilities are going to come from. So that's also a limiting factor in addition to what we're likely to see coming in on regulatory. But I'm a believer.
Well, but part of it too, because of course I have to weigh in on this topic, but part of it too, I've been using this bad joke, which is, what's the difference between generative AI and blockchain? Okay, the difference very simply is you can hold it in your hand. And that's a big part of why this has exploded. And thus, everyone and their cat is asking about how can we make use of this in our enterprise today. So I think every scrap of research we're doing, and Phil's about to tee up some of our latest and greatest in that regard, is showing that this is continuing to speed ahead like the freight train that it is. And I'll also make a point that, like, when you talk to, all right, because Dave, you brought up responsible AI, a massive topic, but I'd just like to put forth this public service announcement. AI is not new. We have a lot of AI teams, data science teams, applied AI being used across all sectors today. At some point, you do have to take the deep breath and say, why large language learning models are definitely a new territory for us. The same principles, the same efficacy, the same ethics that have been in place, the guardrails, the governance that we've created, those are still good. Let's use those. Like, you have to take a moment and just say, oh, okay, wait a second. It is new, but we understand something about this already. And I just find it's like when you take that deep breath and you start to look up and you don't do, because remember, so much of the RPA challenge was, hey, I have this cool tool. What's the problem? You have to make sure you're looking at it the other way around, which is, I have these problems that I need to solve. What could I possibly use? Oh, generative artificial intelligence that's going to use language to tell me useful other things in language would be really helpful for this. That's what we need to see more of.
Yeah, but then how does this benefit something like a managed service? So, we asked, this is 104 companies who are actually doing stuff with Gen AI, and we've managed to get hold of the leaders of the rolling out the Gen AI initiatives. It's a real effort to get this done. And this is literally off the press in the last week. But we asked them, what are the top 3 skills workers are lacking, which you need to succeed in Gen AI in the next 12, 18 months. So at the very bottom, this is the biggest headline to me, is development skills, prompt engineering. That's not the skill that's needed. It's problem solving, adaptability, and critical thinking. This is what people are having to do as they look at these models and start thinking about how can we leverage a smarter synthesis technology to our competitive advantage? Where do we deploy it? I'd love to hear from Ron or Dave about, what you must be having a number of these conversations with clients. In fact, it's probably dominating every conversation with your clients on how can you help them skill up better? What are you doing to yourselves to maybe, get ahead of this as well? Let's be honest. In November of last year, everyone was caught flat-footed by ChatGPT. It was like a thunderbolt through the industry of, oh my God, this thing actually works, right? And now it's this massive scramble for who can actually develop models, get ahead of this, create some capabilities here. But ultimately, this is about problem solving and skill sets. How can managed services be a real plus and added benefit in this area?
So maybe I'll talk a little bit about an area which I know pretty well, and that's kind of in the finance and accounting area. And Elena, to your point, AI has been around for a while, and we at KPMG have been using AI and helping with our intelligent forecasting capabilities. So when you think about having to forecast whatever it is, revenue, FTEs, we were helping our clients, and we got the set of data scientists, we got a set of tools, we got the algorithms, we got the capabilities. Us working with our clients and providing them that learning and that ability has brought them up to speed, almost to the point of where I don't call it outsourcing or managed services. It's only an augmentation of the capabilities of our clients in that high-end area. So, because a client doesn't want to give up their capabilities around forecasting and FP&A, right? They want to augment their capabilities. So us in KPMG can, or any provider for that matter, that's got those skills and capabilities, can provide that to clients. And that brings them along. It also provides us data to get better and tune our models to even more specific and more returns on how we do that. So that's something that's been going on for, well, frankly, 4 or 5 years now. And then what Gen AI has been able to do and is taking that information and then being able to create a board report or be able to report financial statements associated with the stakeholders that are out there. And we do that in minutes, seconds, where it used to take a week, 2 weeks to put together a board presentation or to put together a package that was acceptable to all the stakeholders that are out there. That's happening. It's been happening. But that right now in the last several months, we're seeing an inflection point on picking it up.
So we asked the same people where they're rolling out Gen AI initiatives, and these are the results we're seeing so far. What are the top 3 functions where they're seeing most value generated from Gen AI? And we've got customer ops, call center at the top, sales, business development second, and then strategy setting, what to do, how to implement, how to get there. And actually areas like finance and sourcing are actually much further down the list. This tells me that companies are looking at how do we leverage Gen AI to get ahead, to get competitive edge, to actually be more strategic, how to be smarter at handling call volumes from clients, do it faster and smarter. I mean, when you talk to a healthcare company, for example, about health insurance, they get kind of about 6 different types of call, all asking very similar things. It's fairly repetitive, predictable support if you can drive it more effectively. And I've actually heard from a couple of the largest healthcare providers that they can drive huge amount of cost out of the system by doing this effectively, but they're trying not to look at it that way at the moment. You mentioned, Ron, about finance and accounting. Where do you think we're going to see more adoption in this area, Dave?
I see it a lot in areas that have been untapped in traditional outsourcing. I see a lot more knowledge-based activities that are going to be being addressed by this. You know, your previous slide about problem solving, where you're able to actually replace labor with Gen AI to do that for you is where you're going to see the biggest impact. I don't see this unlike the early days of outsourcing. There's this evolution that's happening. I see it, Gen AI is another form of labor that's going to replace the manual efforts. You're hitting though on what used to be the actual reason why people would say jobs can be generated from outsourcing, is that you're going to be freeing up a lot of people in those knowledge heavy type of activities to then do exactly what you said. Now focus on the analytics part, like really get in, provide the subject matter expertise. What's the data saying? Because now I have time. We got scarce resources now. We've been talking about the war on talent even before the pandemic. It's even more critical now. I see those skill sets becoming more accessible because a lot of what they were doing is going to be offloaded. So I think a lot of those knowledge intensive type of activities, we're getting into it now with forensics and investigations where we're looking at leveraging Gen AI to actually provide that reporting for us. And then we're able to actually free up our forensics teams to do more complex investigations that we haven't been able to get to. So I see that mix, and we're already starting to see it happen.
Right. And I mean, I've got a couple of questions in around sort of related to this in terms of how do you think this is going to affect jobs in this managed services space, and how are leaderships leveraging this new tech to sort of maintain the human factor involved here? What are you seeing that's working and not working so far?
Well, just on that last example where we've been really stretched to find resources in that particular skill set, and I'm just using forensic as one of the examples. We haven't been able to get to a lot of that complex policy reviews to see if there's a more of a source to the problem than there is to the actual problem itself. We haven't had time to actually investigate that and push back on it. So our ability to actually deploy Gen AI and actually be able to take off a lot of that heavy manual activity from them and then do a governance spot check on the outcomes of that has dramatically freed up resources to be able to focus on what's more value added back to our clients, because it addresses policy issues that they can take across their entire firm versus just looking at the reporting. So again, it's a mix of what's going to happen. It'll help us not necessarily create more jobs very specifically for that, but it's going to actually allow them to do what we hired them to do, which is getting a look at more of the policies and the complex investigations. I see that across. If you look at this list, Phil, you could use that example and pick apart each one of them to say how much of your time is into that knowledge transaction type work versus the high-end value creation, especially around some of the sales and business development. We know it in KPMG. We probably run what, 80% of the time pulling together all the sales enablement activities to then versus the real, 20% of really what's the client needs, how do we differentiate in that? You can see that across all kinds of business lines.
If I'd just like to complement your point quickly, Dave, which is, and it's something I think at HFS we've been saying for a while, but I think it's very appropriate here, which is often, in this case, generative AI, but often AI and automation is positioned, and I believe we have a question on this, as capabilities that replace people. We tend to continue to have the viewpoint that it's all about, and you use the word, it's all about the augmentation, beating down the manual or the heavy transaction work and better enabling the strategic work. Or as I like to sometimes inelegantly say, if it's replacing people, those were really bad jobs to begin with.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Very good. But let's get a bit into jobs, because I think one of the big issues we've seen, we're at an inflection point with the outsourcing industry in general. And one of the big issues, I think, has been talent. And this is a study we ran towards the end of last year, but it is crazy relevant in terms of this is 1,800 employees of the 16 leading professional services and outsourcing companies. And we asked them, would you like to feel more challenged in their current role? Most of them, I think 90% of them, completely agree that they do want to feel more challenged. They're bored. Would you accept a job from a competitor, a 30% salary hike, regardless of who it is? Yeah. Again, 80-90% of them are saying, yeah, we'll jump. Do you feel it's difficult to find another job as good as the one you have right now? Only 20% felt that they could. 80% are saying, hey, no, we can hop somewhere else, find another job just as dull as the one I have right now. The one area where I felt there is real potential is 90%, nearly 90% of employees of services firms are passionate about the industry they're in, the business services industry, because of the difference they can make to big clients. So they see the potential. So, I get from reading this is, a lot of these services staff are doing mundane work. They're bored. They're getting less, like, what's the point staying here when I can go somewhere else? They're less loyal to the brand. I've seen other research that shows that employees don't care much about big corporate mandates and rhetoric either. They don't buy it. They're more concerned about their immediate boss and what is around them. But this feels like there's an opportunity for smart managed services businesses who can really nurture their own teams to really get ahead here. I'll throw this out to you, Ron, but does this surprise you? And do you feel, what are you doing at places like your company to get a more energized talent base and use that as a differentiator?
So I'm going to start with, I don't think this is different for any other professional service offering, managed service, consulting. I mean, it's tough. It's out there. This actually reminds me of my youngest daughter and her first job. out of school, and she was in investment banking. So I think she had many of these things as well. It's the time, it's COVID, it's all those effects. But that being said, it's actually concerning, but also I think in moving towards managed services, this is different. We will be taking on roles that are more important, that are going to require more analysis. It's going to challenge individuals more. It's not perfect, and when we look at it, those are less scaled than the big traditional type of managed service opportunities that are out there. But I think that as we continue to move down this route and we have more partnerships with clients, and back to what Elena, we were talking about, the augmentation there, I think that provides opportunity. And in many cases, I'm happy when our employees move to clients and vice versa. That's a little cross population, creates career opportunities, and we help each other out in those sense. So I think a little bit it's a bit timing, probably more than it is the industry at this time. But I do think that we've got some work to do. And I don't know, Dave, you've been doing this longer than I have, so I think different perspective.
Well, let's be clear. When you mean longer than you have, you're just talking the conversion and managed services, not in relationship to our ages. But,
Fair.
But I think, but let's not, Ryan, you said something that when I saw the slide the first time, we have to address that we are in some pretty unprecedented times as far as the workforce in general goes. Not only are we all coming out of the impacts of COVID, the impacts that had on, mental stability of a lot of folks, but also a new way of working, and companies haven't figured this out. Some will say that they've gotten back to what was a normal. I think there's a net new normal that's still yet to be defined to move forward. But Ron, your point about we're pleased that a employee of ours would go to a client and vice versa in that rotation. I think you're going to see more of that. I go back to that ecosystem I was talking about within what a provider has to start building out as that ecosystem. That would apply there as well. I think you're going to see a lot more of that give and take across there, and you're going to see folks being strategically transplanted into alliances to actually work with them that closely for periods of time, almost like secondments. You can see that starting to evolve and formulate now. That's going to allow, because I looked at the very bottom one. I want to be very clear why I'm saying this is people are passionate about the area they're in. It just may be they're not getting challenged. Moving into that ecosystem keeps them connected to that industry or to that specific business line, but gives them those challenges to go back and forth. So that's why I'm saying I think you're going to continue to see that. I think it's a great call out, Ron.
So I'm conscious of time. I just want to flip to one last really big piece of data from our study that we ran together. And this is from like 1,000 enterprises. But, we asked them in managed services, what are you looking for from your partner? And the one thing that really jumped out at us, I think, was people are looking for providers who go way beyond technology at this point. It's about industry skills. It's about advisory skills. But process came out number one. Is this how you think about going to market? Ron, I'll start with you here. And as obviously we talked about Gen AI and other areas like that, these are problem solving areas, right? How does this all play into this kind of transformation conversation that we're going through?
Well, I think this hits it on the head. I don't know that this is much different than the long term, but it really is. The process expertise is first and foremost what's required. It's very similar to those cost count. Yes, of course, cost counts. And this one is process first, process second, and then everything else, or process third even, and then everything else. So, but to be a process expert, you have to be a process expert in a certain industry. It's very different in energy versus CPG versus, tech. And I think those together are the most important aspects of what we're trying to offer our clients. And we're looking at, a repeatable process, one that you can identify and manage and improve, whether regardless of the talent levels. That's what you're always trying to train around is, you shouldn't rely upon, heroship to kind of serve any kind of one solution or one area. And I think this is the number one area. So we agree, and this is how we're building our solutions around process expertise first.
And what about industries? I mean, Elena, you've obviously spent a lot of time covering the financial services space for us, which has gone through a lot of turmoil this year as well. As you listen to them more about their partner relationships, are you seeing this beyond technology conversation becoming more prominent?
Well, yes. And what I mean by that is the technology conversation, particularly in financial services, but sort of to the description I used earlier, any company in any industry that's over 10 years old, modernization, technology modernization is a very realistic concern. I was talking to a cloud transformation leader at a financial services firm earlier this week, and he said he did his first, and I put in little air quotes, cloud transformation a decade ago. We've been hot in the pursuit of digital transformation and tech-enabled change for a long, long time now, and the baseline keeps changing. And so it's not just in addition or moving away from tech. It's very much, I see so much in financial services and other sectors. A big part of the benefit of managed services is it's not just the people, it's not just the technology, it's the combo thereof. And where that really starts to pop in the industry context, Ron, you made the point, which is, sure, maybe it's a horizontal capability that's something like finance and accounting specific, but being able to do that in the context of financial services, in the context of manufacturing, it's very unique. And so you have to bring industry specific capabilities. Or take an industry specific example, like you were talking forensics earlier, Dave, but take something related to that, like risk and regulatory compliance. You can't just pop somebody in there that knows how to run the technology. It's the industry specific domain expertise. And I tend to like to make the distinction between domain somehow seems to be a more horizontal process, whereas industry specific is all about understanding the nuances of that industry. But to do managed services very successfully in an area like risk and regulatory compliance, you really have to understand the nuances of whether it be the know your customer rules and regulations, anti-money laundering, fin crime, regulatory specifics, to be able to truly do those jobs well. So the industry, there's loads of industry examples. And I also like to say, everything happens in an industry. So that's where you marry up the process and the industry.
And Elena, I just want to confirm, I mean, excellent point on the subject matter expertise. It's not also just that, hey, we've got that person that can get plugged in once in a while. When we look at supporting managed services, that is skill sets that just, they need to be there. It can't be a hold on, we'll pull them in, because then there's that ramp up period to really evaluate what's going on in that company. That's why it's just so important for us to see as service providers mature, they have to have that integrated, or they quite frankly can't support the ongoing transformation that the clients need. But it's a great point.
So we have a couple of minutes left. So I want everybody just to tell me the one thing, that one takeaway from today's conversation that is going to stick in their heads and they're going to apply it to their jobs when they get back to the office. So maybe Ron, what's the one thing that you've taken away from today you're going to execute on?
Gosh, there is not one thing. So I'm normally a big, great thing. So I don't have one thing. There's so much to focus on here. But I'm going to stay with this. Elena, when you talk about process expertise in a FinServ, it's exactly why we need Gen AI, because I can actually build a model now with all that knowledge and all that information that augments our workforce to be much smarter than they have to spend 20, 25 years there. So I got excited. I was excited about that, but you reminded me on how excited I am about creating that solution.
Okay, Elena, one thing you're probably right about, right?
Say it again.
One thing that you're probably right about from this.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, so managed services. So I love a conversation like this because managed services is a concept that is not new. And somehow when I say that, it sounds pejorative. And I don't mean that. The whole point of the conversation today is that this is an incredibly useful business model. And even some of the points I made in my response just a few clicks back, this idea that it's not just the technology, it's not just the people, the process, or the industry-specific domain. That's what's interesting about managed services and how it's evolved. It brings all of those. It's none of this like, so we talked about traditional outsourcing models of your mess for less. This is the evolution of that. So the thing that sticks with me is continuing to sort of interrogate and understand the evolution of managed services and how it is actually bringing greater value to customers than where we started today, talking about cost, and possibly cost yet again. What are those new forms of value? Being able to articulate what those new forms of value are, like being able to fight fin crime better, like being able to satisfy your customers in a faster, more expedient manner, being able to really start to identify what those new forms of value are. That's what I take away, and sort of, in a manner of speaking, proving the new S curve, I suppose.
Proving the new S curve. So Dave, in your vast experience, was there an additional big takeaway that you've got from today you're going to execute on?
I learn something new every day, Phil. It's what keeps me young. The biggest thing out of this is the reality of Gen AI, and the practical nature of it needs to be out there and shown. Not the I'll call it the academic approach to it or the hype approach. We need to see examples put in place and how that's going to affect cost structures, how it's going to affect the way we're pricing models. The stuff that we talked about in the early part of this webcast, where we still are struggling to get there, the community, and when I say the community, it's the providers, it's the clients, those that really are putting it in place. We need to tell those stories. And I know you got a channel and you got a venue to be able to do that. I encourage you and Elena and the rest of HFS to bring those examples forward so people can see the practical nature of it. I think that's going to get the acceleration of this. That's the one takeaway I know we at KPMG are going to start doing. Heck of a lot more storytelling, showing what we actually have put in place.
Yeah, wave the flag. That sort of thing. Good. Yeah, I have one myself actually, which is, I think the old era before the inflection point, people were very much the commodity, and technology provided the value in the mindset of the partnerships of managed services. And now I feel we're moving to a partnership model where tech is the commodity and people are the value. It's how, because when the thing about Gen AI is it's a much easier to use, easier to understand technology that can be applied in many, many different ways of the business. This, to many extents, is just commoditizing a broader capability, and it's really shifting the onus to people. How can I get real value? Now I can do things a bit slicker, a bit faster, a bit smarter. I can get data better. So that sort of shift to the people value, I think, is really where this has to go, because we've run out of runway with the old model. But this has been a wonderful hour and a little bit of conversation, and I look forward to we'll do a little write-up of this, share a replay, I think, on our website very, very soon. And I want to thank everybody else for joining on the webcast. We don't do enough of these, I feel, these days, but this has been very refreshing and nice to have a realistic conversation away from all the hype and noise that we've been getting inundated with recently. So thank you very much, Ron Walker and Dave Brown from KPMG, and then my colleague Elena Christopher at HFS. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.